Emma thought she'd found the perfect new home, until the strange noises started. At first, it was just small things moving on their own. But then she discovered hidden crawl spaces, creepy photographs, and a live stream on the dark web showing her every move. And that's when she realized the intruder wasn't breaking in. He had been living in the walls all along. After the breakup, Emma swore she'd never depend on anyone again. The small one-bedroom house she found on the edge of Maple Grove felt like salvation, her new beginning. The street was quiet, framed with maple trees that blushed orange in the early fall sun. A couple of kids played basketball down the block, and an elderly woman next door waved every morning. It all seemed wholesome, too wholesome. The rent was far below what the area usually asked, but the landlord, a mild, balding man who spoke with awkward kindness, said he just wanted someone who'd take care of the place. Emma signed the lease that same day, grateful for the deal. For the first week she slept soundly, feeling lighter than she had in months, but the cracks started small. A coffee mug she always left beside the sink kept appearing on the dining table. Her keys vanished for an entire afternoon, only to show up neatly placed on her pillow. Sometimes when she came home from work, a faint scent of cigarettes lingered, even though she didn't smoke. She brushed it all off. New environments can play tricks on your sense of familiarity. Maybe she'd misplaced things in her rush, maybe a neighbor's smoke drifted in through the vents. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was learning her patterns, like the house itself was studying her. One night she left her shoes by the door before bed. The next morning, one shoe was gone. She searched every room until she found it on the porch, the laces neatly tied together, resting by the welcome mat as if someone had placed it there deliberately. The air in the house began to feel different, heavier, like it was waiting for something. And then, on a chilly Thursday morning, Emma woke up to find her front door wide open. Her first thought was that she'd forgotten to lock it, but deep down she knew she hadn't. She never forgot. Her stomach tightened. She stepped outside, scanning the street. The same elderly neighbor was watering her plants across the fence. When she saw Emma, she smiled faintly and said, almost in passing, "You're the first one to last a whole week in that house." Emma froze. "What do you mean?" The old woman hesitated, then smiled again, too quickly this time. "Oh, nothing, dear. Enjoy your morning." But that one line echoed in Emma's head long after she shut the door. The first one to last a whole week. For a few nights after the open door incident, Emma tried to convince herself it was just nerves. She double-locked the doors, checked the windows twice before bed, even left a lamp on in the hallway. Something she hadn't done since childhood. The glow spilling under her bedroom door brought her a strange comfort, a fragile illusion of safety. But safety has a sound. And one night she realized her house had gone too quiet. The refrigerator hum that usually filled the silence seemed muffled, distant. The ticking of the wall clock stopped completely, even though she had just replaced the battery. Lying in bed, half awake, she heard it. A faint, irregular creak like someone shifting their weight on old wood. At first, she thought it came from outside. But when she held her breath, the sound followed a pattern, a slow, careful step, right above her bed. Her heart climbed into her throat. She stared up at the ceiling, where a patch of light from the street lamp painted a faint orange square. Another step, then another. Measured, heavy, and too human to mistake for settling wood. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing. She listened again. The sound had stopped. For a moment she almost laughed, scolding herself for imagining things. Then came a dragging noise, faint but distinct, directly overhead. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her landlord. It rang 3 times before he answered, his voice groggy. "Sorry, Mr. Dempsey, it's late," she stammered. "But I think someone's in the attic." He was silent for a moment before saying flatly, "There's no attic in that house, Emma." She blinked. "What?" "The roof's sealed. It's an old structure, just beams and insulation up there. You must be hearing the house settle." But she could hear it right now, the soft thud of movement. "No, I can hear—" "Trust me," he interrupted, the edge in his voice unmistakable. "There's nothing up there. Go to bed." He hung up before she could respond. The line went dead, but the sound didn't. Desperate to prove she wasn't losing her mind, Emma dragged a chair under the hallway ceiling panel, where a faint outline suggested a crawl hatch. She pushed gently, but it didn't budge. The wood felt strangely warm against her palm, and then it pulsed. A single vibration, almost like a heartbeat. Emma stumbled back, nearly falling off the chair. The air above her seemed to press down, heavy and still. She stood frozen for minutes, staring at that same square of ceiling, the warmth fading to cold. That night she barely slept. She left the lamp on again, clutching her blanket to her chest. Just as her eyes began to close, she heard it, soft and deliberate, directly above her. A whisper. And this time it wasn't random creaking or wind. It was her name. Emma. By morning, Emma looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed pale skin, dark circles, and eyes that seemed too wide, too alert. The look of someone who'd been listening all night for something that shouldn't exist. She told herself it was time for evidence. Not comfort, not reassurances. Proof. That evening, she drove to a nearby electronics store and bought a cheap home surveillance kit. 4 small cameras and a base unit that recorded to her laptop. The cashier joked about ghost hunting when she mentioned the noises. She forced a smile, pretending it was funny. Back home, she set up the cameras with quiet determination. 1 in the living room, 1 facing the front door, 1 in the hallway, and 1 angled toward her bedroom. She ran the wires neatly along the baseboards, almost ritualistically, like she was building a barrier. When she finished, the house looked the same, but it felt different. She could feel the eyes of the lenses, sterile and unblinking. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in front of her laptop, watching the 4 screens flicker to life. For hours, nothing happened. She even laughed at herself for feeling relieved. "See?" she whispered. "Just creaks. Just the house." She went to bed around 1 a.m., leaving the cameras rolling. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, warm and innocent. But Emma woke up with a knot in her chest. The house was quiet again. Too quiet, she reached for her laptop and began reviewing the footage. From midnight to 3:13 a.m., nothing. Just the dim glow of her hallway lamp and the stillness of an empty home. Then at 3:14 a.m., the living room camera flickered, once, twice, as though the power surged for half a second. The timestamp stuttered. When it resumed, Emma could swear the furniture looked slightly different. She paused the frame, squinting at the screen. Her blanket on the couch, which she'd left folded, was now crumpled. The vent in the corner of the room, a small, old metal grate near the floor, looked like it had shifted. She pressed play again. The footage continued for a few seconds, showing her sleeping in her bed, motionless. Then, just before the timestamp hit 3:15, a shape began to emerge from the darkness near the vent. At first, it was just a distortion, a patch of shadow that seemed thicker than it should be. Then slowly, something pale slid out of the vent. A hand. Thin, long-fingered, trembling slightly as it gripped the carpet. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The figure crawled, painfully slow, and into view. A man, or something like one, his skin stretched tight over bone, hair matted and filthy. His movements were deliberate, practiced, as if he'd done this before. He stood, hunched, watching her bedroom door from the hallway camera. The silence on the video was worse than any sound could have been. Then, without warning, he turned his head toward the camera. Emma slammed her laptop shut, heart pounding so hard it hurt. For a long time, she couldn't breathe. She told herself to open it again, to see, to know. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. On the screen, the footage had skipped. The figure was gone. The room looked normal again. She clicked ahead, frantically searching for another glimpse. When she reached the feed from her bedroom camera, her stomach dropped. There she was, asleep, completely still. And then from the left edge of the frame, the same figure entered quietly, crawling on all fours. He stopped beside her bed and leaned close. His face just inches from hers. His lips moved. He whispered something, but right then, the audio cut out, replaced by faint static. The timestamp flickered once more, 3:14:59, and then the screen went black. Emma didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the shadows made her flinch. By sunrise, she had already replayed the video a dozen times, each viewing leaving her more nauseated than the last. There was no way this was a glitch. She saw the man. She saw him crawl out of the vent. And worse, she saw him lean over her while she slept. Her hands trembled as she called the police. When the two officers arrived, they looked more tired than concerned. One young, one older, both with that detached tone that comes from seeing too many false alarms. She explained everything quickly, voice shaky, showing them the footage on her laptop. They leaned in, squinting at the screen. The younger one frowned. "Huh, that's weird." The older one crossed his arms. "Looks like compression artifacting to me. Glitches happen when lighting changes." "It's not a glitch," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Look at him, he moves. He whispers something to me." The younger cop sighed. "Ma'am, do you live alone?" "Yes," she said. "Anyone who might have access to your house?" "Ex-boyfriend, friend with a key, landlord?" "No," she said again, more firmly. "I changed the locks when I moved in." They exchanged a glance, and the kind of glance people share when they've already decided you're overreacting. The older one closed the laptop gently. "Here's what I'll do. I'll file a report, note the disturbance, and suggest you get better locks or maybe a new security system. There's no sign of forced entry. No proof of anyone being inside. The video alone isn't enough." Emma's stomach turned. "You think I made this up?" He forced a sympathetic smile. "We're not saying that. But you'd be surprised how many people think they're seeing things when they're just under stress." That word, stress cause, made her blood boil. When they left, she felt even worse than before. The house seemed to mock her silence as if it was listening to her humiliation. That night, she grabbed a hammer and nails, marched to the vent, and sealed it shut herself. Each nail echoed through the small house, bang, 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 until she could barely hear her own thoughts. When she was done, she stood there breathing hard, sweat clinging to her palms. "You're not coming out again," she whispered. She left her phone recording audio on the bedside table just in case. The room was dim, the only sound the faint hum of her fan. Somehow exhaustion finally pulled her into a shallow sleep. At dawn, sunlight woke her. She reached for her phone to check the recording, heart pounding with dread. The vent, the one she'd nailed shut, was hanging open. The nails were scattered neatly on the floor below it, and when she hit play on her phone's recording, the night's silence stretched on for hours. Until the final minute, a faint shuffle, a breath, then a soft male voice, calm and almost amused, whispering right into the microphone. "Why'd you close my door?" Emma stared at the vent for what felt like hours, frozen. Her hands were still shaking from the night's whisper, her chest tight with panic. Every rational part of her mind screamed to call the police again, but deep down she knew they wouldn't believe her. Not fully. Not until she had proof. Proof meant action. With trembling fingers, she ripped the vent off its frame. Cold metal scraped against the wall. Behind it, darkness yawned, thick and suffocating. A foul stench immediately hit her. The acrid, rotten smell of decay mixed with something metallic like old blood. She gagged and stumbled back, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. Shoving aside the insulation, she crawled into the narrow passage. Her flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The walls were lined with splintered wood, old dust and something else, faint scratches. small claw-like marks as if someone or something had been trying to dig outward. She saw it then, a blanket, filthy and matted, stuffed into the corner. Next to it, a pile of food wrappers, spoiled, moldy, and crawling with insects. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Someone had been living here. Her hands trembled as she pushed further. Then she noticed the stack of photographs. The top one made her freeze. It was her sleeping in her bed, perfectly still. Her hair fanned out across the pillow, soft morning light catching her face. But she hadn't taken the photo. She didn't know how it had been captured. Hard hammering, she sifted through the rest. Shower shots, kitchen shots, images of her drinking coffee, reading, even brushing her teeth. One photo made her blood run cold. She was standing in the kitchen, smiling at the camera, completely aware. And she didn't remember ever being there. Her stomach turned. Nausea clawed at her throat. She backed toward the entrance, but her flashlight flickered, casting the crawl space in jagged, dancing shadows. And then she saw it. An ID card, tucked under the blanket. The name on it wasn't hers. It belonged to a man who had vanished months before. The previous tenant. Suddenly, all the small signs, all the oddities fell into a horrifying pattern. The misplaced mug, the moving keys, the faint smell of smoke, the footsteps above the ceiling. This wasn't random. This wasn't a ghost or a trick of her mind. Someone had been here, watching her, living in the walls. Emma scrambled out of the crawl space, slamming the vent shut behind her. She leaned against the wall, panting, flashlight trembling in her hand, heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst. The house was silent, too silent, and somewhere inside, in the dark, she could swear she heard a soft exhale like someone laughing at her fear. Emma didn't wait another night. The vent had been ripped open once again, the crawl space evidence too damning to ignore. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. She grabbed her phone and drove to the landlord's small office. A cluttered room smelling of old paper and coffee. Mr. Dempsey looked up from his desk as she stormed in, flashlight and photos clutched in her hands. "I need to know what's going on in that house," she said, voice shaking with fear and anger. "There's someone inside. They've been living there, watching me." The landlord's face went pale, the color draining so quickly it was almost unnatural. His hands, which had been tapping absent-mindedly on the desk, stilled. You don't understand," he stammered, swallowing hard. "That house has history." Emma raised an eyebrow, gripping the stack of photos tighter. "History? Explain now." He hesitated, eyes darting to the window as if someone might be listening. "The last tenant, he disappeared without a trace. We thought he ran off. People around here just accepted it. But the crawl spaces? We never checked them. The foundation's unstable, dangerous. We figured it was better left alone." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. "So you knew? You knew someone could be inside, and you did nothing?" I couldn't imagine." His voice trailed off. He avoided her eyes, shuffling papers nervously. "No one thought it would happen again. No one thought—" She stopped him with a firm gesture. "I'm recording this," she said, holding up her phone. "Everything. Your words, everything you've just admitted." For a moment, the landlord seemed frozen, caught between panic and compliance. "Fine," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But you have to understand. Houses like that, they have a way of holding on to people. Some things never leave." Emma's stomach twisted. The words made no logical sense, but the tone, the weight behind them, was enough to make her shiver. She left his office, the stack of photos and recording clutched to her chest like armor. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, shadows stretching long across the street. She felt eyes on her. The feeling was so strong she half expected to see someone emerge from the walls around her car. That night, she played the recording back in her bedroom. Every word he'd said echoed in the silence, and then the file disappeared just like that. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The recording was gone. Not corrupted, not moved, deleted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Someone was inside the house and they had access to her technology, to her life. And now even her proof was gone. Emma realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the house wasn't just a building. It was a trap, and she was the prey. The house had gone silent, unnervingly silent. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but the kind that presses against your eardrums until you start hearing your own heartbeat. Emma sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blank space where her phone recording used to be. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. She'd tried to convince herself she was safe and that maybe she'd accidentally deleted the file. But then she heard it. A faint scrape. Somewhere inside the walls. It was soft at first, a slow, deliberate drag of something metallic against wood. She held her breath. The sound came again, closer this time. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She pressed her ear to the wall. For a long moment there was nothing, and then a tap, once, twice, then silence. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she called Mark, an old friend who worked in home renovation. "I need you to check something," she said, trying to sound calm. "I think there's someone living inside my walls." Mark laughed nervously at first, but when he arrived and she showed him the crawl space, his face changed. "Emma, these vents, they're connected. Look here." He pointed his flashlight into the opening. "See that panel? That's not standard framing. Someone added that later. And this," he knocked on the drywall, "is hollow." He went out to his truck and returned with a small cutting tool. "If you really want to know what's inside, we'll find out." Emma watched as he sliced through the wall, dust and fragments spilling to the floor. The smell hit first, stale air mixed with something sweet and rotten. Mark gagged and stepped back. Behind the drywall wasn't insulation. It was a tunnel, a narrow, human-sized corridor that ran parallel to the entire length of the house. Old food wrappers, torn blankets, and crushed soda cans littered the ground. The beam of the flashlight stretched into blackness. "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "There's more." Mark followed the tunnel's curve with his light. It branched off. Multiple paths. A network. He swallowed hard, backing away. "Emma, someone built this. Not for maintenance, for hiding, for moving through the house unseen." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Emma couldn't breathe. "How long do you think?" Mark cut her off. "I'm not staying to find out." He grabbed his tools and bolted for the door. "You need to leave. Now." The front door slammed behind him and Emma was alone again. Her flashlight flickered once. Then again, she turned toward the hole in the wall. The tunnel yawned back at her like a throat, and then a sound. A low, steady breathing. Warm air brushed her face. She froze. The breath came again, this time followed by a soft, wet chuckle. Emma stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen plaster. Her heart pounded so violently she thought she might faint. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a single word whispered from the darkness. "Stay." The lights flickered violently, then went out completely. Emma didn't leave the house. Not yet. Something inside her, that blend of fear and defiance, refused to run until she understood why. She'd been sitting cross-legged on the living room floor for hours, staring at the open tunnel. The air inside it was colder than the rest of the house, like it had its own atmosphere. She could hear faint dripping somewhere deep within, rhythmic and slow. Finally, she forced herself up. She needed to know what this presence, they wanted from her. So she turned to what she knew. Information. She opened her laptop and connected to her router's admin panel, trying to see if anything unusual was using her network. Her hands trembled as she typed. The list that appeared made her heart stop. Active connections. Her home network should have had just one. The IPs were hidden. Strange, non-routable addresses leading to encrypted nodes. She opened one out of morbid curiosity. The screen went black for a moment. Then a single window loaded, a player buffering. The title read, Roommate Number 4, Live Feed. Her stomach dropped. The video showed her own living room. The same one she was sitting in. The same light flickering from her desk lamp. She glanced around. The angle didn't match any of her installed cameras. Her pulse raced as she moved slowly around the room, eyes scanning every surface. And then she saw it. A tiny lens embedded between the slats of an air vent above the couch. Jesus Christ, she whispered. The stream continued running, and on the side of the window a chat box flickered with real-time comments.
She found the lens. She's prettier up close. Don't scare her yet. Emma's throat tightened.
She backed away from the screen, bile rising. Whoever, whatever, was in her house wasn't just watching her. They were broadcasting her life. She scrolled down the page and saw archives, labeled by months and usernames. Roommate number 1. Roommate number 2. Roommate number 3. Each stream thumbnail showed different women, all inside the same house. Her breath caught. It wasn't just her home. It was a set. The house was a stage, the walls wired for voyeurism, the crawl spaces used for movement between angles. And she was the latest in a series. Then the chat box froze for a moment. A single new message appeared. She's reading the comments right now. Emma's hand jerked away from the mouse as if burned. The message was followed by another. Don't turn around. Her eyes darted toward the dark corner behind her monitor. Nothing moved. The air felt colder. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She slammed the laptop shut and sprinted toward the door, fumbling with the lock. But just as she turned the handle, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text. From an unknown number. You're live again. The sound of a camera shutter echoed behind her. Emma barely slept that night. The house felt alive. Every shadow twisted unnaturally. Every floorboard groaned as if bearing a hidden weight. She kept her phone in her hand, ready to call 911, ready to scream, ready for anything, though she had no idea if anyone would even believe her. Then, around midnight, the power went out. The lamps died, the laptop went black, and the hum of the fridge stopped. Silence pressed in so thick it seemed almost solid. Emma grabbed a kitchen knife and locked herself in the bathroom. She pressed her back against the cold tiles, knees drawn up. Flashlight clutched in one hand, phone in the other. Her breathing echoed too loudly in the small room, and then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, wet, deliberate. From the hallway, Emma froze. Her blood ran cold. The footsteps paused, then resumed, dragging toward the bathroom. Each step sounded like it carried the weight of someone who had been living in the walls for years. She dialed 911. Her fingers shook so badly the buttons were nearly impossible to press. 1. What's your emergency? The operator asked. Please. Someone's in my house, she whispered, voice trembling. He's been living inside the walls and watching me. I don't know what to do. Ma'am, stay calm. Officers are on the way, the operator said. Emma's eyes darted to the bathroom door. The knob rattled, faintly at first, then more aggressively. Her stomach clenched in terror. They're already inside, she said, repeating the operator's words aloud. They're already inside, a soft male voice whispered from the other side of the door. They're not. Emma's heart stopped. The handle began turning slowly. From the inside, she pressed her body against the door, knife raised, trembling. The knob rattled again. The low whisper returned, closer now. You can't hide. The lights flickered weakly for a second, illuminating the silhouette of a hand pressed against the opaque glass panel of the bathroom door. Then darkness returned. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable, every nerve screaming that this was it. The door handle clicked once, twice, and then silence. Hours seemed to stretch into infinity. She stayed crouched against the tiles, listening for any sound, every creak amplified into terror. When she finally heard sirens outside, she dared to hope. She opened the door just a crack. The hallway was empty. The living room, the kitchen, everything looked untouched. But her phone sitting on the counter buzzed again. A notification. She picked it up and her blood ran cold. The live feed from her own cameras was still streaming. And in the dim glow of the screen, a single new comment flashed. She's here. Alone. Perfect. Hours later, the police finally arrived. They barged in through the front door, flashlights cutting through the gloom of the still dark house. Emma led them through the rooms, her voice trembling, pointing toward the crawl spaces, the vent, the hidden passages she had discovered. The officers' faces were grim, but skeptical. Empty, one muttered. We're not seeing anyone. No footprints. No forced entry. Nothing unusual. Emma's stomach twisted. She had hoped this would end, that the authorities would finally validate her terror. But the house wasn't finished with her. They searched every room, checked every corner, even peeked into the crawl spaces with their flashlights. Everything was exactly as she had left it, except her phone, propped up in the living room, screen glowing faintly in the darkness, the camera still recording, streaming live. Emma's blood ran cold as she recognized the angle. It wasn't her setup. The camera had been placed somewhere deep inside the walls, capturing every moment, every terrified expression. The officers bent over, squinting at the screen, and then he appeared. The intruder. His face pale and thin, eyes gleaming in the dim light, smiling directly into the camera. He leaned forward as if speaking to the viewers. Who's next? Emma gasped. The officers turned toward the crawl space, but it was empty, silent. And then Emma noticed the wall behind him. Written in messy red marker, stretched across the plaster like a cruel invitation. Welcome home, roommate number 5. Her knees buckled. She backed away, choking on a scream. The last thing the camera caught was her wide-eyed horror. The very moment she realized the house was no longer just a trap. It was a stage for him, for the hidden watchers, and for anyone willing to pay to see fear in its purest form. Emma had survived the night. But the story, the broadcast, the eyes in the walls, they weren't done with her. Somewhere in the dark web, thousands had already tuned in, and somewhere in the house, the softest whisper carried through the crawl spaces. Next,